Respected. When a man starts pulling away, most women chase answers. But what happens when you stop chasing and match his distance instead? What happens inside his mind when the attention he took for granted suddenly disappears? The answer may surprise you, because sometimes your silence speaks louder than 1,000 words ever could. There is a moment in many relationships that changes everything. It is not a fight. It is not a breakup. It is not even a harsh conversation. It is the moment when one person notices that the effort is no longer being matched. The messages become shorter. The calls become less frequent. The excitement slowly fades. And suddenly, one person finds themselves carrying the emotional weight of the entire relationship. Many women experience this moment and immediately begin asking questions. Did I do something wrong? Is he losing interest? Should I try harder? Should I call first? Should I fight for this relationship? And while those questions seem natural, they often lead to a painful cycle. The more effort one person gives, the less effort the other feels required to provide. The more available you become, the more invisible your value can sometimes seem. Today I want to tell you a story, not because stories solve every problem, but because stories help us see ourselves more clearly. There was a woman named Hannah. Hannah was kind, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, the kind of woman who checked on people when they were sick, the kind of woman who stayed loyal even when loyalty wasn't being returned. When Hannah met Michael, she believed she had found something special. In the beginning, Michael was everything she hoped for. He called often. He planned dates. He listened carefully. He made her feel seen. Every message from him brought a smile to her face. Every conversation felt effortless. And like many relationships, the beginning felt magical. But then something changed. Not overnight. Not dramatically. Slowly. Almost invisibly. Michael's calls became less frequent. His texts became shorter. His enthusiasm seemed weaker. Sometimes hours passed before he replied. Sometimes entire evenings passed without hearing from him. Hannah noticed it immediately. Women often notice emotional shifts long before they are ever spoken aloud. At first, she tried to understand. Maybe he was busy. Maybe work was stressful. Maybe life was overwhelming. She gave him grace. Then she gave him more grace. Then she gave him even more. Soon she found herself doing almost all the reaching out. She initiated most conversations. She checked in first. She carried the connection. And every time she felt him pulling away, she stepped closer. Because that is what many loving people do. When they fear losing someone, they increase their effort. But one evening, Hannah sat alone in her apartment, staring at her phone. She had sent a thoughtful message that morning. 12 hours later, there was still no reply. Yet she could see he had been active online. She stared at the screen, not angry, not jealous, just tired, emotionally tired. And for the first time, she asked herself a different question. Not why is he pulling away, but why am I working so hard to keep someone close who keeps choosing distance? That question changed everything. Because sometimes growth begins when we stop focusing on another person's behavior and start examining our own. The next day, Hannah made a decision. She would stop chasing, not as a game, not as manipulation, not as revenge. She would simply match the energy she was receiving. If he texted, she would respond warmly. If he called, she would answer. But she would no longer carry the relationship alone. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Most people underestimate how difficult it is to stop doing something that has become emotional habit. She wanted to text him. She wanted to ask questions. She wanted reassurance. But instead, she focused on herself. She returned to activities she loved. She spent more time with friends. She exercised. She read books. She rebuilt parts of her life she had neglected while focusing so heavily on someone else. Days passed. Then something interesting happened, Michael noticed. Now here's what many people misunderstand about men. Men often become aware of value when its absence creates contrast. When something is constantly available, its presence can become expected. But when that same thing becomes less available, awareness increases. Michael wasn't used to silence from Hannah. He wasn't used to waiting. He wasn't used to wondering. For the first time, he experienced the space he had been creating himself. And that space forced him to think. This is where many men begin asking questions inside their own minds. Why hasn't she texted? Is she upset? Is she losing interest? Did something change? Notice something important. These are often the exact same questions she had been asking earlier. The emotional mirror had finally been turned around, and suddenly he found himself standing where she once stood. Many men are not intentionally cruel when they become distant. Sometimes they become comfortable, sometimes distracted, sometimes careless, sometimes immature, sometimes uncertain about what they truly want. But when the effort they receive suddenly matches the effort they give, they are forced to confront reality. For Michael, that reality felt uncomfortable. He began checking his phone more often. He noticed her absence. He noticed her reduced availability. Most importantly, he noticed how much emotional stability she had been quietly providing. The thing about human beings is that we often don't appreciate emotional consistency until it disappears. A person who always checks on you, a person who always supports you, a person who always listens, a person who always shows up. Those things can become invisible when they are constant, but remove them and suddenly their value becomes obvious. Weeks passed. One afternoon, Michael finally called, not because Hannah demanded it, not because she chased him, not because she begged for attention. He called because curiosity had grown inside him. Curiosity is powerful. People chase what they feel they might lose. People think about what they no longer fully understand. People value what requires intention. When Hannah answered, she was calm, warm, friendly, but different, not cold, not bitter, simply centered. For the first time in months, her happiness was not dependent on the outcome of a single conversation. And Michael could feel it. Men often sense confidence before they can explain it. They notice when a woman no longer needs validation to feel valuable. They notice when her self-respect becomes stronger than her fear of losing someone. That energy changes everything, because confidence is attractive in ways physical beauty can never fully replicate. Confidence communicates abundance. Confidence communicates self-worth. Confidence communicates that your life remains meaningful regardless of another person's choices. And that realization can create powerful thoughts inside a man's mind. He begins wondering what changed. He begins wondering whether he misjudged your value. He begins wondering whether someone else might eventually recognize what he failed to appreciate. Suddenly, the certainty he once felt begins to disappear. And certainty is often what creates complacency. The moment certainty disappears, attention frequently returns. But here's the lesson most people miss. The purpose of matching his distance is not to make him chase you. The purpose is to stop abandoning yourself. Too many people think this strategy is about controlling another person's emotions. It isn't. It is about reclaiming your own. It is about remembering that your worth does not increase when someone chooses you, and it does not decrease when someone pulls away. Your value existed before the relationship. Your value exists during the relationship, and your value remains if the relationship ends. That is the truth Hannah slowly began to understand. For the first time in a long time, she felt peaceful, not because Michael changed, but because she changed. And when a person changes from neediness to self-respect, from chasing to choosing, from fear to confidence, the entire dynamic shifts. What happened next would teach both Hannah and Michael a lesson neither of them would ever forget. A few days after that phone call, Michael found himself thinking about Hannah more than he had in months. It happened in small moments, while driving home from work, while scrolling through his phone late at night, while sitting alone on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The strange thing was that Hannah had not done anything dramatic. She had not posted cryptic messages online. She had not tried to make him jealous. She had not started arguments. She had simply stepped back and allowed reality to reveal itself. And reality was beginning to speak loudly inside Michael's mind. For the first time, he was experiencing the relationship without Hannah carrying it. There were no constant check-ins, no thoughtful good morning texts, no emotional safety net waiting for him every single day. And that absence forced him to confront something uncomfortable. He had become accustomed to receiving effort without fully appreciating it. Now, before anyone misunderstands, this is not a story about blaming men. Women can do the exact same thing. Human beings often fail to recognize value when they become too familiar with it. The lesson is universal. But in Michael's case, familiarity had created blindness. He had stopped seeing Hannah clearly, not because she had changed, but because he assumed she would always be there. That assumption is dangerous in every relationship. The moment we believe someone will never leave, never change, never grow tired, and never walk away, we risk taking their presence for granted. One evening, Michael was sitting with a friend named David. They had known each other for years. After talking about work and everyday life, David noticed something unusual. "You seem distracted," he said. Michael laughed. "A little." David leaned back. "What happened?" Michael hesitated. Then he said something he hadn't admitted to anyone before. "Hannah feels different lately." David smiled slightly. "Different how?" Michael thought for a moment. "She's not reaching out like she used to." "And how often do you reach out to her?" The question landed harder than Michael expected, because sometimes the questions we avoid are the ones we need most. He realized he didn't have a good answer. For months, he had expected Hannah to maintain the connection. For months, she had been doing the emotional work. For months, he had been benefiting from effort he wasn't fully returning. And now that the effort was gone, he felt the difference. David looked at him carefully. "Maybe she's tired." Those three words stayed with Michael. Maybe she's tired. Not angry, not dramatic, not playing games. Just tired. Tired of carrying what was supposed to be shared. Tired of investing without receiving. Tired of hoping things would improve. Many women watching this right now understand that kind of exhaustion. It isn't loud. It doesn't arrive in one day. It builds slowly. One disappointment at a time. One unanswered message at a time. One broken promise at a time. One moment of feeling unimportant at a time. Until eventually something inside you changes. Not because you stop caring, but because you finally realize caring alone cannot sustain a relationship. Meanwhile, Michael's thoughts continued to grow stronger. The more Hannah focused on her own life, the more noticeable her absence became. This is one of the great paradoxes of human nature. The harder you chase, the less space someone has to miss you. The moment you stop chasing, space appears. And within that space, awareness begins. Michael started looking back at memories. Their first date, their long conversations, the nights they laughed until neither of them could breathe, the support Hannah gave him during difficult times, the encouragement she offered when nobody else believed in him. Memories have a way of becoming clearer when distance enters the picture. Sometimes we don't fully recognize a blessing while we're standing inside it. Only after stepping away do we understand its true value. Weeks later, Michael sent Hannah a message. Not because he was bored, not because he wanted attention, because he genuinely wanted to talk. The conversation was easy, natural, comfortable. Yet something had changed. The old imbalance was gone. Hannah no longer sounded like someone waiting to be chosen. She sounded like someone who had already chosen herself. And that difference affected Michael deeply. You see, when a woman discovers her worth, something powerful happens. She stops negotiating for basic respect. She stops begging for consistency. She stops convincing people to care. Instead, she simply observes actions and makes decisions accordingly. That kind of strength cannot be faked. And men notice it, not because it is loud, but because it is rare. Michael began paying closer attention. He noticed Hannah laughing more. He noticed she seemed happier. He noticed she wasn't emotionally dependent on his responses anymore. And suddenly a new thought entered his mind. What if I actually lose her? Now this is the moment many people dream about. The moment when the other person finally realizes your value. The moment when they finally wake up. The moment when they start chasing. But here's the truth nobody talks about. By the time that realization happens, the person who was once chasing has often changed. Growth changes priorities. Healing changes standards. Self-respect changes expectations. The version of Hannah who would have accepted crumbs 6 months earlier no longer existed. She had grown. And growth changes everything. One afternoon they met for coffee. Michael arrived first. As he waited, he felt something unusual. Nervousness. Not because Hannah intimidated him, because he suddenly cared more than he had allowed himself to admit. When she walked in, she looked peaceful, confident, present, not trying to impress anyone, just comfortable with herself. And there is something incredibly attractive about a person who is comfortable with themselves. Throughout the conversation, Michael found himself listening differently, watching differently, appreciating differently. He noticed things he had overlooked before. Her kindness, her intelligence, her patience, her strength, the very qualities that had always been there, the very qualities he had stopped noticing. At one point, Michael looked at her and asked a simple question. Have you been happier lately? Hannah smiled, a genuine smile. The kind that comes from inner peace rather than temporary excitement. Actually, yes, that answer surprised him. For months, he had assumed her happiness was connected to him. Now he realized something important. She had built a life that didn't depend entirely on his presence. And that realization created both admiration and fear. Admiration because he respected her strength. Fear because he understood she no longer needed him the way she once had. Many men experience this exact internal conflict. When a woman constantly chases, they may feel secure. But when she becomes secure within herself, they realize they must actually bring value to keep her. The game disappears. The illusion disappears. Only reality remains. And reality asks a simple question. Are you willing to match the effort of the person standing in front of you? That question now sat heavily in Michael's heart. For the first time, he wasn't wondering whether Hannah would stay. He was wondering whether he had done enough to deserve her staying. And that shift changed everything. Because when a man begins questioning his own effort instead of questioning your worth, the entire relationship dynamic transforms. But the most important lesson was not happening inside Michael. It was happening inside Hannah, because she was learning something that would protect her heart for the rest of her life. She was learning that peace is more valuable than chasing. Self-respect is more valuable than approval. And emotional freedom is more valuable than temporary attention. The woman who once waited anxiously for every message was becoming someone entirely different, someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who finally understood that love should feel like a partnership, not a performance. And soon, both Hannah and Michael would face a decision that would reveal what truly lives inside a person's heart when distance becomes a mirror. The weeks that followed became a turning point neither Hannah nor Michael could have predicted. Something had shifted between them. Not dramatically, not overnight, but deeply. The conversations became more meaningful. The silence between messages no longer felt heavy. And for the first time in a long time, neither person was forcing anything. That is one of the greatest signs of emotional maturity. When connection no longer feels like work. When you stop trying to convince someone to care. When you stop carrying responsibilities that belong to two people, life becomes lighter. And Hannah was finally experiencing that freedom. One evening she was sitting on her balcony watching the sunset. The sky was painted with shades of gold and orange. The world seemed quiet, peaceful. And in that moment she realized something important. Months earlier, she would have spent that evening staring at her phone, wondering why Michael had not texted, analyzing every interaction, creating stories inside her mind, searching for reassurance. But now she was simply enjoying her own company. That realization almost made her laugh, because she understood something many people spend years learning. The relationship with yourself sets the standard for every other relationship in your life. If you abandon yourself to keep someone else, you eventually lose both. If you respect yourself, you teach others how to respect you too. At the same time, Michael was facing a different kind of journey. For months, he had lived comfortably inside uncertainty. He had kept one foot in and one foot out, enough effort to keep the relationship alive, not enough effort to truly nurture it. Many people do this, not because they are evil, not because they enjoy hurting others, because commitment requires clarity, and clarity requires courage. It takes courage to fully choose someone. It takes courage to show up consistently. It takes courage to invest emotionally when there are no guarantees. Now, Michael could no longer hide behind uncertainty. The distance Hannah mirrored back to him had forced him to see the truth. He cared about her more than he had admitted, more than he had understood. And that realization brought a new question. What was he going to do about it? You see, awareness means nothing without action. A person can realize your value and still fail to treat you properly. A person can miss you and still remain inconsistent. A person can love you and still lack the emotional maturity required for a healthy relationship. That is why actions matter more than feelings, because feelings create intentions. Actions create reality. A few days later, Michael met his father for lunch. His father was a quiet man, the kind of man who didn't speak often, but when he did, people listened. During the meal, Michael found himself talking about Hannah. He shared the story, the distance, the changes, the confusion. And when he finished, his father asked him one simple question. What kind of man do you want to be? Michael blinked. He expected advice about relationships. Instead, he received a question about character. His father continued. Because this isn't really about Hannah. Michael looked confused. What do you mean? His father leaned forward. Son, whether it's Hannah or someone else, eventually every man has to decide what kind of partner he wants to become. The words settled heavily in the air. You can't keep expecting relationship rewards while avoiding relationship responsibilities. Michael sat silently. His father wasn't criticizing him. He was challenging him. There is a difference. The people who truly care about us don't always tell us what we want to hear. They tell us what we need to hear. For the first time, Michael stopped focusing on whether Hannah would stay. Instead, he began focusing on whether he was becoming the kind of man worthy of a healthy relationship. That question changed his perspective completely. Meanwhile, Hannah's life continued expanding. She started taking classes she had postponed. She traveled with friends. She pursued goals she had neglected. And every new experience strengthened her confidence. This is something many people fail to understand. When you stop chasing someone, the energy you recover doesn't disappear. It gets redirected into growth, into healing, into purpose, into yourself. That energy becomes fuel. And once you experience that transformation, you begin to realize how much of your life was being consumed by anxiety. One Saturday afternoon, Hannah attended a gathering hosted by a close friend. The room was filled with laughter, conversation, and warmth. As she stood talking with people, she felt genuinely happy, not performative happiness, not temporary excitement, real happiness, the kind that comes from alignment, the kind that comes from living according to your values. And in that moment, she received a message from Michael. Months earlier, receiving that message would have immediately changed her mood. It would have become the center of her attention. Now, it was simply one pleasant part of an already fulfilling day. That difference may sound small, but it is enormous. Because emotional independence doesn't mean you stop caring. It means your happiness is no longer held hostage by another person's behavior. That is true freedom. Later that evening, Michael asked if they could meet. When they sat down together, there was something different in his eyes, a seriousness, a clarity. The conversation started casually, but eventually Michael took a deep breath. "There is something I need to say." Hannah listened quietly. "I think I've spent a long time assuming you would always be there." The honesty surprised her. Michael continued, "And because of that, I stopped appreciating what you brought into my life." For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said something even more important. "When you stopped chasing me, I finally saw how much effort you had been carrying." That statement represented a powerful truth. Many men don't fully understand a woman's contribution until they are forced to experience life without it. Not because they don't care, because comfort can create blindness. Distance removes that blindness. Distance reveals reality. Distance exposes imbalance. Distance creates perspective. Michael looked at Hannah. "I don't want to lose what we have." Now, here's the part most people expect. The dramatic reconciliation, the instant happy ending, the movie scene, but real life rarely works that way because growth changes people. And Hannah had grown. She smiled softly. Then she said something that Michael would remember forever. "I don't want to lose it either, but I also don't want to lose myself." Those words carried wisdom. Wisdom earned through disappointment. Wisdom earned through healing. Wisdom earned through self-discovery. Because the greatest mistake many people make in relationships is believing they must choose between love and self-respect. Healthy love never requires that choice. Real love protects self-respect. Real love supports growth. Real love encourages authenticity. As the evening continued, they spoke honestly, perhaps more honestly than ever before. Not about blame, not about guilt, not about past mistakes, about the future, about expectations, about effort, about what a healthy partnership actually looks like. And for the first time, they were no longer speaking from fear.